Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this CIEEM webinar on banter, breaking or making barriers. My name is Christy Hamilton, and I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here at CIEEM, and I'm here with Stella Chandler from Focal Point Training and Consultancy. I will be shortly handing over to Stella, but before I do, I'd just like to make you aware that we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And the way to send in your questions is by clicking on the Q&A button at the top and then typing your question and pressing send. But like I said, we will do that at the end, but please do feel free to send them in throughout. We will also be doing quite a few polls, so look out for them, and they give you a chance to interact with the webinar and make live choices to the questions. But yes, without further ado, I will now hand over to Stella.
Thank you, Christy, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you all had a good week. A particular thank you for this, because this is a subject that's very dear to my heart, and I think some of the events that have happened in the last week, you'll relate to those as we look at this subject. I'm going to ask you to reflect a bit. I'm conscious some of you will probably be sitting there on your own as you do this, so I'm going to ask you, perhaps if you have got a pen and paper or something that you take notes on, to have that to hand, because a couple of times during this webinar I am going to ask you to do that. As Christy said, please send questions, please participate in our polls, which will be really interesting. And also, as a heads up, at the end of the webinar I'm going to be asking you to think about the actions that you will take away from this. So thank you. So first up, I'm going to ask you to think about a 6-letter word, and that word is banter. It's a Brexit-free webinar, this, so it's a 6-letter word that begins with B that is not Brexit. And I want you to think right now, as I've said that word, what is the first thing that has come into your mind? And if you can note that down somewhere, that will be great. It may be that you see that as a bit of fun, and it can be, and it is. Having a laugh, bringing people together, getting to know one another, and building a sense of team. Because banter can be all of those things. And hence the title of this webinar, because it does bring down barriers in teams. It helps us to get to know one another, and it absolutely can create a shared sense of fun, and I absolutely love that, as I do all those other things. But, and you knew there was a but coming, banter can also put up those barriers when it crosses the line. And again, that's a difficult phrase, and we'll come back to that. What do we actually mean by that? But when we have done that, it starts to exclude people. And the work that we do in Focal Point, we talk with a lot of people about creating inclusive environments. And people often think about that. We talk a lot, don't we, about diversity and inclusion. But perhaps we don't always stop and think about all these kind of things that happen. Because if we have got somebody who feels that barrier has gone up, they will feel excluded from what's going on. And these are the things that happen, you know, minute by minute, day by day in teams. So banter then also can be an example of inappropriate behaviour. And I think particularly why I hone in on this is during my career I have dealt with many cases of, you know, and I'm always careful when I say this, we talk about serious or not, or less serious, but cases that probably we would recognise and call those things as being serious, that actually the starting point was probably a joke that had just got out of hand. So that's where banter, as I say, can actually make that link to all forms of inappropriate behaviour. So what we're going to ask you to do now is just to think about, when we use that word banter, what do we actually mean? Because it actually sums up a number of things. And I'm going to show you 4 things now. I'm not saying they're the only things that a banter are, but certainly in our work with people and asking them to think, what do we mean by that word banter? These are the kind of things that people talk about. So I'm going to ask you now to tell us yes, no to these 4 things. So how many of you have been the butt of an ongoing joke? So a joke that has continued much longer than you'd want it to be. And we often do use that phrase, don't we? The butt of an ongoing joke. Stopping there, okay. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, that's really helpful. So over half of you listening now have known that, and I'll ask you in a minute as well, just reflect on how that's made you feel. So second one is, have you been given a nickname you didn't like or want? So that's the key thing there. It's the nickname that you didn't like or want. Thank you. It's fascinating actually watching the percentages go up and down.
I sent there.
Gosh, I nearly made a joke about Brexit then, because it was looking like 48-52, and I said it was a Brexit-free webinar. Okay, wow. Half of you then listening to this have been given a nickname that you didn't want. Thank you. Okay, third question. Have you done something that has passed into folklore and is regularly referred to? So again, a phrase that we hear quite often when people talk about that, but again, it's that incident and it's regularly referred to. Okay. Okay, that's settling there. Okay. Well, that's good. Actually, that's the first one that's come up with actually more of you saying no to yes. So that's a good one. Okay, thank you. And the fourth one, have you been introduced to somebody new, and by that perhaps somebody that's come in for a meeting, somebody new to your team, with a reference to an in-joke? Is that settling there? Okay, all right, okay. Thanks, Chrissy. Chrissy's doing all the great work on the technology today, so thank you very much. Really interesting, those four things. And if we can just go back to I'll just bring them up. Yeah, bring them up on the screen for you. I have certainly been, three of these really do resonate with me. A few years ago, I went on a holiday, fortnight-long holiday. It's probably the longest holiday that I've ever had, but for all the wrong reasons. It was on about day 3, an incident happened. Quite not a big thing, but the 3 friends I was with, I think they still are friends, not sure. It was just a joke, and they made the most amazing links. It was quite creative, really. But it gave me a chance, and this is before I really started working in this area, just to experience what it feels like to be on the end of that. A nickname, if you were listening and you realise I'm Stella, I've probably heard just about every joke going about Stella Artois, so please don't send one of those in later. But again, people give nicknames to other people, often without ever thinking of checking whether they're okay or not. I think this is a really interesting area as well to think about, because often nicknames we give to people, when we talk to people, are often meant actually, and people reflect on them, as something endearing, or as I say, perhaps again, linked to something that has happened. But the key thing is here, did they like it or not? A piece of work that I was doing in some wholesale markets, I got introduced to somebody called Batteries. This poor man, at the age of 12, had lost most of his hearing, and he wore hearing aids with batteries, and people just regularly shouted at him, and they just decided that the explanation afterwards was when the batteries ran low, they had to shout louder. But he was introduced to me, and that was the name he had. As I must admit, it's one of the the successes I always look back on, because he's now, as far as I'm aware still, by the end of the piece of work we did, we had actually got people to recognise, you know, the difference, as I say, between a nickname you like and a nickname you don't. I'm in a very strong position to talk about this because my father joined the Metropolitan Police Service in 1954 and was given the nickname of Jeff Chandler, who anyone who might remember that time, I'm sorry, I don't quite, but he was probably the Brad Pitt of the mid-50s. My dad had never liked his birth name and has saw this as a great opportunity. So much so now, all of the family, all of his friends call him Jeff. And if I was to say to him, you know, Dad, I really don't like this, you can't have a nickname, that's not his choice. So again, a real difference here between a nickname that we choose to give people and whether we check out then, of course, or not, whether they actually like that. Done something that's passed into folklore. Again, a number of you are recognising this. And again, very often a small... Sorry about that. I put the phone off after before that's gone off. A small incident that is actually, you know, constantly referred back to. I've got one of our clients, lovely guy. He bought himself a new pair of suede boots. I mean, I think pretty similar, not so similar to what I'm actually wearing today. He went into the kitchen where he works and made himself a microwavable curry. As he was coming back out through the door, he dropped the curry and it went over his boots and ruined his boots. Bad enough for him anyway, but what we found out afterwards was it's every time he went into the kitchen to get himself lunch, somebody would make a joke. Now these things, you know, if you've never been on the receiving end of that, you kind of like think, what is the problem? But if you are one of those people that is listening who has been and possibly is now, you will know just how wearing it is. And it's things like that that start to, you know, really affect how we feel, how we relate, which we'll look at later. And as I say, really also, you know, just our general sense of well-being and our mental health. And we are constantly feeling that these comments are being made. And that really brings me to the last one as well. And sadly, in our organisation, we now have a number of examples of these kind of things. When we're about to start a project with a new client, we like to do what I've dubbed a purposeful wander. And that is to go onto the site, depending, you know, what the locations are. I ask for somebody just to sort of give me a sense of the layout, etc. And then I will go off just myself and I chat to people. I get a sense of, you know, where they are and all this kind of thing. So classic example, first day on a site, manufacturing company, we were standing in the car park, different buildings on the site, and the guide saw a couple of guys coming across the car park towards us and introduced them to me as Big Chris and Little Chris. I said hello and off we went. Anyway, I wanted to catch up with these and I was very fortunate. Later on in the day, I came across both of them on their own and went and talked to them. So Little Chris, and again, not a phrase I particularly like, but he was what we would call probably below average size physically. And I asked him how he felt when he'd been introduced to me, a stranger, earlier that day. And he shared with me that he hated it. He was regularly teased by his friends about his physique and not being able to pull somebody on a night out. And he said, this is I'm constantly reminded of that every day that I come to work. And of course, the classic thing as well, I said to him, do you think you can do anything about it? And as often happens in these instances, he said no, because they'll just do it all the more. Later on, I met Big Chris, same conversation with him, lovely man, and he explained to me that he had a medical condition. He could not shift his additional weight. And comments like, look who ate the pies, whenever he walked through the door, were a regular part of his day. And he did admit again that it actually, you know, did affect his confidence. And as we'll look at in just a minute as well, very often this leads to people not participating in work as well as they could, let alone us not just realising what the impact is on them as colleagues. So Thinking about this as well and wanting to find out more, just over 3 years ago in Focal Point, we went out to our client base and we asked people if they would share with us, much as I've just asked you on the polls, what kind of banter made them feel uncomfortable. 70%, we had 250 people, by the way, responding. I know that's not a huge number, but we've shared these, the results from the survey with quite a number of organisations since, who've also done some surveys themselves, and these are very consistent, the figures that are coming back. So nearly 70% of them said it was the point scoring, the constant one-upmanship that made them feel uncomfortable. 62% the butt of an ongoing joke. 66 said jokes becoming offensive, and my business partner and I have been working in this area now for over 20 years, and we do believe and feel that there's not very much that shocks us. We still say to this day, when we read the free text that people were kind enough to share with us when we did this survey, we were both shocked at the kind of things people thought it was okay to say to one another. And you're probably sitting there now thinking, I wonder if she's going to give me some examples. It may not quite be appropriate, but if I was to say to you, a lot of them were questions around sexual activity, stuff like that. People thought it was just okay to ask questions, make jokes and stuff like that. It's really quite unbelievable. And then we had as well on our survey, 60% of people saying that they had had an unwanted nickname. We also asked people questions about the impact this has, because a lot of us don't stop and think about this kind of thing. 1 in 5 of our people that said that they believe that up to 2 hours of their working day is wasted on workplace banter. So yeah, stop and think about that and think about what else we could be doing with that time. I'm particularly interested as well around when we talk about it affecting communication. And again, we've asked people what that meant and a range of answers, but a consistent one has been probably just not, talking to people in the way they would do. We know there's too much emailing anyway, but actually a lot of people said as well, oh, it's easy to email because we don't get the comments back again. People also talked, and again, a very common one, and certainly in a number of our clients, has been the impact it has on people not wanting to make a contribution in a meeting, because if they draw attention to themselves by saying something, somebody would make a put down about a nickname or the folklore story or something like that. We talk regularly, don't we, in organisations about how do we motivate people, how do we engage them, but are we stopping and thinking about how we demotivate them and how we disengage them? And it can be some of these things that people just do not, take notice of the impact that it's having on people. 1 in 10 say that banter crosses the line once a day. And of course, statistics are great because it depends how you want to put it. We could say, of course, that 9 out of 10 say that it doesn't. So that's all okay then, isn't it? But again, just stop and think, however many are in your team, that's 1 in 10 people are saying it crosses the line. And certainly in a number of organisations where we've been working since, we have had higher scores back than that. But as I say, that's a rough average figure for us to think about. So 1 in 5 say that it demotivates them. So we're, commenting on that. So again, stop and think about the number of people in your team and that potential impact, which brings us on to thinking about that. So again, we're just going to ask you to share, and I should promise you that we can't see who you are you're doing. So if you can be honest in the answers to these questions, that would be great. So how many of us, and I do say us because I have done this, I know I have perpetuated a joke or folklore story, and I know I was spurred on by the fact that it was making other people laugh. So if you could tell us, yes or no, have you perpetuated a joke, a nickname, or a folklore story? Okay, thank you. Okay, that's looking about 2/3 of you. Really appreciate your honesty. Thank you very much. Can I also then ask you the next question to that is, have you stopped to think what impact that may have had on the other person? And again, I know it's one of my motivations for doing the work that I do now. No, I didn't. I was too busy focusing on the fact that I seem to have made other people laugh. Okay. Okay, it's settling. Is it settling there? Okay, thank you. Again, really appreciate your honesty in saying that. And the third question here is just thinking about, you know, does that line up with your organisation and your own values about respecting others? Again, I had absolutely, a phrase again we use a lot in Focal Point these days, I had not joined up the dots. As I say, the fact other people were laughing all seemed great, and I'm somebody that prides myself on having values, pride myself on believing I respect others, but had just not stopped and thought, this is a massive part of doing that, how we make other people feel. Okay, lovely, thank you. Thank you for that. So again, just bringing those we looked at there and stopped and thought about that. So as I commented on earlier, banter and all forms of inappropriate behaviour can affect everything from our day-to-day relationships right to the bottom line. And of course, I'm sure we can all start to then join the dots up and just what we've looked at recently, that, you know, if we have got 1 in 4 people, for whatever reason, feeling that this has affected their communication, we start thinking, well, what contributions then are we missing from them? And of course, we can quickly draw that point to that bottom line. And of course, you know, it's crossing the line. It affects our ability to build an inclusive and respectful workplaces. Those are terrific words, and they're the aspirations nowadays of many organisations. But unless we do really stop and think from start to finish what those things actually mean and the impact of the things we're talking about right now, we are not going to be able to tick the box to say that we have done that. But I also really, really want to reassure you, I hope you got a sense a little bit by listening to my voice already, but, you know, what I am passionate about is wanting people to feel and understand what we mean here. We want people to have fun. My background, I was on the civilian side of the Metropolitan Police, followed a little bit in Dad's footsteps. And when I say that sometimes, I get the joke, which is not just funny, but, you know, about being the fun police, which, you know, I'm so disappointed when that is said, because, you know, that is absolutely not what we're wanting. We want people to be able to have a laugh, but as we're going to look at, and of course we're saying already, it's not at other people's expense. One of my least favourite phrases as well in this whole area is about being politically correct, and I'm afraid my experience of that has been when often people say that, it's because they're just not willing themselves to stop and look at their own behaviour. So this is not about being politically correct. One of the other things I found reassuring when I started to get interested in this area, that no, none of us have to be an expert in diversity, inclusion issues to behave properly. This is the key. It's just about being willing to look at our own behaviour. And I say, certainly I don't mind admitting whatsoever that, you know, again, so one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing now, one of my motivations is I know that I wasn't stopping and thinking, and particularly thinking about the impact of the things that were going on other people. So please, please, as you listen to this, do not think, I never want to talk to Stella Chandler ever again, because we can have no fun. I really, really hope that would not be the case at all. The more we've got, as I say, interested in thinking about workplaces now, it really struck us as well how our workplaces have changed. They're much more informal now. working relationships are just very different to what they were a little time ago. People socialise far more with colleagues than they do in the past. And overall, that's left us we tend now to talk more openly about our lives. And one of the things I think that we are not recognising is the difference to our relationships that social media has made. We invite people into our lives in a way that we never did before. Linking back to workplaces, and I do make myself feel a little bit older at this point. When I first started work, I tended to work 8 till 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, I would say goodbye to my colleagues. And unless there was a party happening that weekend, which didn't happen that often, the chances are I would have no more contact with those people until 8 AM on the Monday morning. I look back to my colleagues at that time, and I think we were friendly and interested, but we just did not have the amount of information that very often we share with people in workplaces. Quite a number of people that we are working with now are aware of this and beginning to think about the distinctions between, perhaps not having colleagues on some of their social media platforms and actually seeing that as a different part of their lives. We all have to make our own decisions in this area, but we do also need to recognise that if we do have friends on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, then we are inviting them into our lives, and we have to accept the consequences for that. We are going to be sharing information which people may then feel, as it has been shared with them, quite entitled to talk to us about in the workplace. So social media can be great, but I also think when we think about what's happened in the past week as well, we also know that it very much can have those downsides. And so we have to just take responsibility for, who we have as friends on social media and the information that we're sharing, because it is likely to impact then on the way that people will talk about things that they've seen on social media with us back in our workplaces. Dress codes are much more relaxed, and all of these things are good things, but as I say, what's happening is it's just changing for a lot of people the perception around their working relationships. We work far more flexibly from a variety of locations. Somebody was only describing to me the other day that they're now working in quite a funky workplace, and they were just describing it as that. And they said it's not visibly dissimilar from actually their home. I was very impressed they had a funky home as well. But they just said it's really strange now. Sit at the kitchen table. I might, I've got emails going on, I've got my phone perhaps with Facebook on or something like that. And actually the sense, the environment that I'm in doesn't feel very different. So really, it's not surprising that, the lines in our different parts of our lives are blurring. I say lots of positives in what we've just talked about, but we do need to stop and think about how that is impacted on the relationships that we have at work. And one of the things, we often say to people is, there is a real difference in, what's okay in the workplace and what's not, to, those of you that might be down the pub tonight, 9 o'clock with your mates, the things that you might say and do with them, there are some significant differences to what's appropriate and what's not in our workplaces. So what can we do to ensure we're creating the right culture? And again, I want to ask you a question here. We need to help people join the dots from the values, the behaviours and the policies that people have in organisations. So I'm going to ask you now, how many of you have had the chance to read your policies? Sorry about that. We haven't. Sorry, we haven't got the question for that. What we find when we ask that question, it's normally about 75% of people at events we are at when we ask these kind of questions that have not had that opportunity. Regrettably, in many organisations, the first time people find out about policies and the behaviours and what's expected is when somebody's telling them that they have done something inappropriate. They have crossed this line, what we talk about, crossed the line. So it might be something that you might want to reflect on after this webinar, as to whether there's something in your organisation that needs to happen around asking people, giving people that opportunity to discuss these kind of things. So we need to be able to, and again, a phrase I use a lot, is decode what is appropriate behaviour. So in your own organisation, if somebody was to come up to you, if you're in your offices this afternoon, and ask you that question, what is inappropriate behaviour? What does it look like round here? How would you answer that question? Bit of a rhetorical question, that one, but one that we set up and ask and get people to think about when we're working with them. One of the things that really helps organisations when they're having that conversation is to create a team charter. Quite a lot of organisations have something called a code of conduct. Not a phrase I particularly like, because it does very quickly sort of make me think about disciplinary matters. But the idea about a team charter, the best ones are created by the team, talking about them, thinking about what that is. So it sums up how people will behave. So not a great long list. A really good one is probably 10 to 12 bullet points, but it allows people to understand what that means around here. Really good if it does link to something that you may already have in your organisation, and they can be personalised for individual teams. It should use plain language and be understood by everyone. One of our clients, and this is where the stuff we talked about now, has in their charter about swearing, and in their own code of conduct it would suggest that swearing is a disciplinary offence. Well, actually, we need to get real, don't we? In most adult environments we know there will be some swearing. The difference is people need to understand there's a massive difference between swearing at somebody and swearing perhaps because your email hasn't gone, or you didn't save the document you thought you saved, or something like that. Now, I'm not saying swearing is okay, because I'm very aware that for a lot of people, that in itself can make people feel uncomfortable. So again, things we need to talk about. But actually, a number of our clients know and accept in their workplaces there will be some swearing. So actually have that as part of the charter, so people understand what we mean. The charter needs to be real. If it's not real, people will just see it as a tick box exercise and not do anything with it. Vital then that new team members have the chance to discuss the charter, and again using specific examples. We are delighted, we've had a number of clients that we've supported to get to the point where they have got their charter, and they now have it as part of the induction process. So somebody will join the organisation, and within the first day or so, after we've shown them where the kettle is and where the loo is, etc., and stuff like that, they absolutely see that as one of the first things that they will talk to and explain to people. And it's often best done by the new team member's own line manager. Shouldn't be seen as tablets of stone, but would be reviewed regularly. Again, a number of our clients do things like, every few months, team leaders will have it on their agenda to discuss and get people, using positive examples where the charter has been, positively used and helpful. So, and it might change, as we say, as time goes on, but it gives people that opportunity to ask questions, think about it, and actually see as well, which is really important, how it's benefiting the organisation to have that. We really do need as well to ensure that everybody in the organisation understands they've got that responsibility. And as I say, that's the phrase we use in this area to get people to understand it. It's a responsibility to behave in a way that doesn't make others feel uncomfortable. So again, if you're starting to think, trying to decode in your mind, what do we mean when we talk about crossing the line? That's quite a good way of actually thinking about it, because if your behaviour in any way has made people feel uncomfortable, then you've crossed the line. And I would just clarify as well here, a question I get asked a lot about this, and particularly perhaps from those people in a line management role that may need to give somebody some feedback about their performance, yes, that may have made the team member feel uncomfortable if they're not performing to the right level. So there's a clear distinction here. What I'm talking about is the behaviour that has left somebody feeling uncomfortable. We talk to people about having two responsibilities. A responsibility to look at their own behaviour, as we've said, and a responsibility to speak up if they're made to feel uncomfortable in any way. Now, I would absolutely clarify that, and we'll come back to this point a little bit later. What we're saying here is that if you have been made to feel uncomfortable, you do need to do something about that. And there's a whole range. It may be that the person themselves just is able to say something to whoever it is that's made them feel uncomfortable, and that's great if they feel they can do that. And then hopefully it just stays between the two people, end of. But for a whole range of totally acceptable reasons, people may not feel comfortable in doing that. It could be their line manager, it just could be a colleague that they just don't want to talk to. That's absolutely fine. What they then need to do is to talk to somebody who then can do something about it. So most of the clients we're working with now, we're absolutely talking about things to their people in that way, and they really like that. So it's fair to everybody then. We don't have people left worrying whether they've upset somebody else, because that's the deal. You know, if people have been made to feel uncomfortable, at the earliest opportunity, they will talk to somebody and something to happen. So it's working well, those two responsibilities. Whilst everybody has a responsibility to be looking at their behaviour, we do recognise that those people in management leadership positions must take the lead on that. So we must make sure that they've got the confidence and the skills to role model the right behaviours. Again, we're having lots of conversations. Only early this week, I was working with a senior team, wanting to roll something out, absolutely doing the right things, making sure that before they talk to other people in their organisation, they as a senior team are very clear. And again, we talked in very specific terms what we mean when we use that phrase, role modelling, and role modelling the right behaviours. A phrase that I now know is in the Oxford Dictionary, so that's all good. Be able to nip things in the bud. The vast majority of things in this area are done by people who do not intend to offend. So if we have the confidence and the skills just to be able to say to somebody immediately that that has made us feel uncomfortable, and if possible explain why, we're nipping things in the bud, that's often the best way of dealing with these things. And as I say, we need to create a culture where people truly believe they will be supported if they speak up. We've worked with a number of organisations that have introduced speak up policies or called them something like that, and then turned to us and wondered why they weren't working. They won't work unless people believe that if they are brave enough, and it often does take bravery to do that, they'll be taken seriously, and critically something will be done as a result of it. So we really, really need to think about what we're doing to give people the confidence to do that. And if we are going to tackle that, whatever that inappropriate behaviour may be, let's just think about for our own selves. Because I know for me, and I've been involved in this area for a long time, but if I think I need to tackle a piece of inappropriate behaviour, it might be when I'm leading a session, or it can happen at any time. I know that, I'll be honest, my heartbeat goes up a bit, and I worry that, well, the group of people I'm working with think that I'm a killjoy. So there's a range of feelings and emotions that we may have about doing that. But if we are witnessing inappropriate behaviour, we do need to do something about it. And we just need to stop and think, if there is something that's stopping us dealing with it, how can we overcome those barriers? If somebody has acted in an inappropriate way, the chances are that it will happen again unless somebody actually tells them that. So by avoiding having that difficult conversation, I'm not suggesting they're easy, that it is likely to happen again. So we then need to think about, what are our options for dealing with things? we've been asked to say by a number of clients to really help them think through this, and we created this flowchart as a result of that. So, and we're looking at that and starting at the top there, any form of inappropriate behaviour, so certainly some of the examples that we've looked at in this webinar, and then just coming down to that second line. Do you feel able to deal with it yourself, dealing with it in the moment, possibly planning for a conversation later? One of the great things, of course, about dealing with it in the moment is that somebody straight away just knows that there's something inappropriate that has happened, and you know it's going to be, as I say, nipped in the bud quickly and hopefully end of. Sometimes when we do that, often say to people, just it might be worth having a conversation and following up with the person afterwards, check they're all right. Vast majority of times when I've done that, the person's been very embarrassed that they've done something inappropriate, and have really welcomed that opportunity. The other thing, of course, is important as well to think about is that if you have just dealt with it in the moment, they may not truly have understood why it was inappropriate and may not have come back to us. So some of those things just to think about in terms of following through. So hopefully that flowchart will be helpful as well, just to give you a chance to sort of think through situations in your own organisation. And just summing up a few of those things, you know, being alert to situations, addressing them early is absolutely the best thing. Do check your understanding. I know there's been times I've walked into an office, I've overheard something and actually, you know, only got one side of the story. So always make sure you do that first, otherwise we end up ourselves being inappropriate. Choose an appropriate time and place to address the situation. It's rarely best done when we're going to have a conversation in front of other people, because that's, you know, for many reasons that's inappropriate, but also they may not, for a range of reasons, be listening properly to what we're going to say. And also we must, you know, take an exploratory approach, ask questions and really listen. You may think you know what the person's going to say, and it's then very easy not to have listened properly. And as I say, repeating myself again, the vast majority of things in this area are not done intentionally. So by, you know, treating the person in a way that we're respecting them and asking them questions and getting them to think about why whatever they've done is inappropriate is absolutely the best way to build all this. But do use your own knowledge as well, legislation, people's rights, responsibilities. Trust your own gut feeling. The phrase I use is that if my antennae has flapped that something's inappropriate, the chances it is. Or it's about to cross that line. And I now know, and I recognise that, I will always step in and deal with something. Whenever we're talking to people, you know, do describe the behaviour using specific examples. Conscious sometimes people find that quite embarrassing. If you were in a situation and you really just found it was just, you know, too uncomfortable for you to deal with, think about just asking a colleague perhaps to have that conversation. So absolutely recognise that. But as much as possible, we need to use specific examples. Saying things to people like, you know what I mean, doesn't help. We really do need to make sure the person's understood why it's been inappropriate. So as I say, link the conversation to your organisation's values, behaviours. We've had some great feedback from clients that have followed through and sort of introduced team charters and things. How much reduction there is in this kind of thing, but when it does happen, so I'm not saying having a team charter will always prevent issues happening, but we've had feedback that managers found it so much easier to deal with things when they've known that they've got the team chart and they're able to refer to that and explain that to the person again why this has been inappropriate. Take ownership for the feedback. I look back on the very first time as a young line manager I tried to deal with this, and I said to somebody in my team, no, John really doesn't like when you joke like that. John was my own line manager, so the team member's second manager. I thought I'd handled the situation well, but was quite surprised when the team member continued to joke in this kind of way until the penny dropped. What I'd actually said to them pretty much was, don't do it when John's in the room. So not easy, this stuff, but we absolutely need to. You know, it's our feedback and we need to own that. As I said, confirm why the behaviour is inappropriate and ask for a specific and sustained change of behaviour. That is what we need. So treat the other person as equal throughout. I'm probably going to say it for about the third time, but most of the things that you will be dealing with will be done by people that did not intend to offend. If we know people are intending to offend and are, you know, persistent in behaviour, then I'm afraid we're talking about taking, you know, stronger action, perhaps disciplinary action. But again, the vast majority of situations, I do believe that if we treat the other person as equal throughout, they will respect us and they will be grateful. Maybe not always quite in the moment, but more times than not, people are grateful that we've actually, you know, pointed out their behaviour to them. Accept an apology if offered, and hopefully, of course, it's a genuine one. And as I said, as managers, colleagues, keep an eye on the situation and reinforce positive changes through further feedback. What's critical in all of this is that we actually make sure that this is what we do every day and that everybody understands that. And as I say, we really do want to create that environment that is fun for everyone every day. So what I'm going to ask you to do now, just before we have a look at a few questions, is to reflect back on this, and again, really appreciate your honest answers at different points of the webinar, particularly maybe around when we talked about the people perpetuating things like this. Maybe there's a colleague that you realise now may have a nickname, you weren't quite sure whether they like it or not. So maybe that's an action that you'll take away, or maybe it's something as well that you'll think about in terms of at an organisational level. Perhaps it's having a look at the policies you've got. Perhaps it's about giving people the opportunity to decode them and really understand what it means for them. Or perhaps it might be thinking about creating a team charter. So I think we're going to ask you just to think about that for a moment or so. And if anybody is willing to share one of those actions for us, and if they can put that into the question box, that will be great. I'm now going to put Christy on the spot and ask her, is there anything that you've been thinking about whilst you've been listening to me talking?
Yes, yeah, something that resonated with me was just to become more confident and speak up and, like you say, nip things in the bud. And if I don't necessarily feel confident, perhaps, you know, keeping that aside and having a chat later on. Yeah, I'd like to work more on that, I think.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we want to have a look and see whether anybody's asked us any, or anybody shared any actions first of all? That would be great.
We do have. So yeah, an anonymous attendee. Sorry, but out of all of the places I've worked, only one did I hear swearing at. Actually, swearing is called taboo language in linguistics and has no place in the workplace. It is unprofessional.
I agree with that. Well, of course I agree with that, but and you know, in many ways it would be great if in workplaces we just said it is completely unacceptable. What I think we do find though is that people will swear, and again, it's when we talk about swear words, we do know that there are some swear words that are considered much more offensive than others and really do need to be stopped straight away. But in lots of workplaces, it's a way that people feel they are just able to air frustration. If we have a team and we have somebody in a team that really does find it uncomfortable, unacceptable, then it is right in that team that we open up that discussion and make sure that people do understand the impact it is having on other colleagues. It's a difficult one, but again, it's something that if we can open up the conversation and get people to understand what it feels like for other people, then hopefully we can actually find a way of moving it forward.
Great, thank you, Stella. We do have a few more questions coming in. How do you deal with negative banter when the person responsible is the manager and the team deal with it by accepting it and tiptoeing around the manager's behaviour?
That happens more times than not, actually. It's certainly a situation we've encountered a lot. I think we're moving into a place where people are feeling more able to speak up. A lot of organisations are doing that. I would hope that perhaps somebody in the team was able to raise the matter, perhaps on a one-to-one with their manager, perhaps one, well, it doesn't have to be one of the senior members of the team, but anybody that feels able to do that. That would be my first suggestion. If nobody felt able to, then who else in their organisation? Could it be the second line manager? Could it be somebody that has a responsibility for HR? Could it be somebody who they feel another manager might be able to talk to their own manager? So it's not acceptable, and it would be putting pressure on people. So I would suggest that as a team, think about how you can raise the matter, but don't let it carry on. That's not acceptable. And at some point, that manager needs to realise the impact they're having on the team.
Thank you, Stella. Another question from Drew. Do you think the word banter is often used as an excuse to allow a joke to go too far, i.e. it's just a bit of banter? Totally and utterly.
The first time I heard that when I was working, I remember it having an impact on me, and I've never liked the word myself. And I didn't at that stage really quite understand and think about it in the way that I do now. I think, yes, I think entirely. And that's why I said at the beginning of this webinar, I'm passionate about opening up the conversations around this area, because I think a lot of people use it as an excuse and then are not prepared to look at their own behaviour. So yes, yes, and yes is my answer to that question.
Thank you, Stella. Another question from Lisa. How do you deal with "I was only teasing"?
Yeah, another good one, probably not dissimilar to Drew's question as well. If at all possible, and it's somebody that said it to me, because I've been on the receiving end of this, certainly around my name, as I say, Stella Artois, and all of that. I have spoken to the person one-to-one and just said to them, I know from your perspective you feel you're only teasing, but that is not something that I feel comfortable with. And in that instance, I said to people, and the trouble is as well, if you say it to me, then other people will think it's okay to say as well. So yeah, similar to before, it's often used just as an excuse and to say it's okay to carry on, but if it's made us feel uncomfortable, all the things that we've talked about before apply.
Thank you. Another question. One of my colleagues is teased quite often, but he wants the attention. How would you deal with this?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. The person that's put that question in, maybe that you feel that you might be in a position to ask him some questions. Do you know for definite, for example, that he wants the attention, or is it you're suspecting that? And there's a whole range of reasons why that. We don't want to become, we're not becoming psychologists or counsellors in our workplace, but just opening up that conversation and maybe just an open question. I notice you joke quite a lot about that. Why is that? And just see whether you can get the person to open up. And again, if it's a distraction for other people, a lot of people work, perhaps in open plan office, and people doing things like that can actually be very distracting for the whole team. Hence some of those statistics earlier on about how much this kind of stuff wastes time. So if I was in that situation, wouldn't want to make any assumptions about what was going on, but I would, find a way one-to-one of opening up a conversation, a succinct, open question, holding the silence, letting your colleague answer would be my next step with that.
Thank you, Stella. Not necessarily a question, but more of a statement. One comment on swearing to share my experiences. It might be okay on a friend-to-friend basis, but I have noticed if I do it, the junior colleagues seem to escalate. seems to highlight the need for role modelling.
Totally, 100%. And spookily, before I came here this morning, I was just talking to somebody. They're in a sales environment and have absolutely said that. They realise that one of the team leaders does it, part of his comment, when they've come off a phone call, and absolutely, as you say, why not? If your boss does it, why not us? So yeah, that was exactly the conversation I had this morning. So the person I was talking to is going to open up a conversation at a meeting early next week with all of the managers about it, because it's not just the person in this particular example. But yeah, it brings it, those kind of examples are really good, because it actually brings alive what we mean when we talk about role modelling. I absolutely meet a lot of people that tell me they're role modelling. I do wonder sometimes what they think they're role modelling. So yeah, really good question, and I agree with that.
Thank you, Stella. Another question here. How do you respond to being criticised by a manager for being quiet or introverted and not getting involved in office banter?
No. Okay, oh dear, I think I'd like to be able to talk to this person and help them. And I'm sorry that, very, very sorry that your manager is misunderstanding that, you know, being a quieter person, nothing wrong with that, it's great, and not get involved in that. If you can talk to your manager and just say that's not something that you enjoy doing, it would also be great. And maybe as well, we could suggest to that manager, and again, the nice visual picture that we've got on this slide as well, you know, about having that discussion. Perhaps we could open up a conversation in the team more broadly as well about what's okay and what's not, because I suspect you perhaps are not the only person that's feeling uncomfortable, but I hope you do feel that you can raise the conversation with your manager yourself and get them to see that. Quite often, and we talk about introverted and extroverted personalities, quite often a manager or somebody that, you know, criticizes other people for being an introvert is, at the other end of the scale, is an extrovert and doesn't understand the difference and just thinks everybody should be joining in. So I very much hope that you feel you can have that conversation. If you don't feel you can, then again, go back perhaps to look at that slide. Is there a colleague that might perhaps be able to broker that conversation for you? But please do try and find a way of doing something about that, because that's clearly not a comfortable place for you to be in, and it's not fair that you are in that position.
Thank you, Stella. It looks like that's all of the questions that have come in. Yeah, if you would like to send a question in, please do so now, or I'm sure you can contact Stella.
Absolutely, please do. I think our details are on the website for this, and very happy to share this PowerPoint with people as well if they would like that.
Yeah,
so we will do that. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope as a result of that you will be, well, you clearly are already, reflecting on your behaviour and just thinking about the impact. But also, please remember, you know, our workplaces should be fun places. Have fun. Just make sure it's never at anyone else's, you know, expense, which is going to make them feel uncomfortable. Thank you very much. Thank you for doing all the technology, Kirsty. Thank you.
Stella, thank you
for
very
listening.
much. Thanks for joining.